Based on Social Security data, the average wage in the country is $30,000, $30,533 to be more precise. More apropos, the majority of the country, or the majority of the people in the country, if presented with a $400 bill, would not be able to pay that $400 bill without selling something of their possessions. Many people, most, are going to, I can't say most, a large share of the population, when they retire, is going to have zero in the bank. Now, this is in the context of record profits from the corporate class and the capitalist class. In addition to this, you have this odd phenomena where productivity is through the roof. Wages, stagnant. Real wages, anyway, stagnant. The cost of living going up, meaning healthcare, education, through the roof. What does a person do in this? Now, this is in the context, again, of corporate profits that are going through the roof. This is in a context of income inequality going massive, at largest point than any time in our history, even going back to the point of the Great Depression. This is America, richest country on the planet, half of the country living in poverty or relative poverty. The UN did a report and found that there is a massive number of people who are homeless or who are destitute in this country. You only need to go to California to see the people who are living on the streets, or Seattle, Washington, to see people living on the streets. Again, this is in a context of corporate profits that are through the roof. And the fact of the matter is that the reason to some degree that corporate profits are through the roof is because of the amelioration of the working class. 95% of the wealth under the guy who was called a socialist and a communist went to the top 1%. Who makes that case? Who pushes that case home? Donald Trump is running around the country talking about income inequality, talking about the world is going great, and talking about low unemployment. But the unemployment number in the United States is somewhat fictitious. There's a certain number of people who stop looking for jobs. I've given you that number. Well, I think it's like over 60% of people presented with a $400 bill couldn't afford to pay it. So this idea of saying that the income inequality, or it's not income inequality, you never really made that case, but this idea that unemployment is extremely low is somewhat of a fictitious number. When you have half of the country in poverty, this idea of unemployment being great is somewhat, again, fictitious. You have corporate profits through the roof, and these guys have doing stock buybacks. All of this is in the context, income inequality and everything else, with Donald Trump giving a massive tax cut. Republicans screaming at the top of their lungs that they care about the debt, while simultaneously putting $1.5 trillion of debt on our backs. When Donald Trump won that election, they screamed that they would bleed on a flag to prevent Obama from putting one red cent on the back of our grandkids, while simultaneously raising it to $9 trillion the moment that Donald Trump was elected, meaning the debt limit to $9 trillion when Donald Trump was elected. Donald Trump, at this very moment, is trying to take the unprecedented step of going around Congress in order to pass another tax cut. The previous tax cut going squarely to the top 1% and to the corporate class. Who makes that case? Who represents the workers in this argument? You have two classes, meaning Democratic and Republican, both captured by corporate profits. Meaning the Republican Party is locked, stock, and owned by the top 1%. And the Democratic Party gets their campaign donations from the same sources of the Republican Party, and as such will never make that case in a full-throated way. You will get the random Democrat that may make that case, but the established order of things is not to make that case. It's not to push vociferously for the workers. Centrism, radical centrism, is the order of the day. You're at a point in time where the country is literally pulling itself apart. And I would make the argument that even though people don't necessarily look at it this way, they look at this stuff as individual choices, it's not an individual choice. Fact is, the amelioration of the working class is like throwing bird to pigeons and having them peck each other to trying to get scraps. 95% of the wealth went to the top 1% under Obama. It would be as if one guy comes in and takes 95 slices of pizza and say, you bitches fight over the 5%, the rest of you. Who makes that case? Who fights for the misfits? The people who argue and say, that's not right, that's not fair. The people who bake the bread, who fixes the roads, who creates the software programs. Yes, the haberdashers, the coffee pourers. Who makes that argument for them? They are the people who make our society go. I'm talking about all those people, everything that you do when you interact in your society. Those are the people that make the society go. I'm asking you, why on earth do you need to give 95% of the wealth to the top 1%? Should that wealth not go to the people who are actually doing the jobs and actually doing the work? I would say yes. I would say that's what a rational person would say. And yet we have this oligarch system where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are owned by the people who essentially put down those campaign donations. I would say when Klobuchar, Democratic donor, comes out and says, shut up, snarling, shut up about the billionaire word, shut up about this idea of wealth being accrued in the way it's being accrued, and if you don't shut up, I would close my wallets. Both parties are captured. The problem is not one nor the other. The problem is both. The thing is, the Democratic Party had a philosophical responsibility to represent the interests of the poor, the workers, the 99%. And they relinquished that role through these new Democrats, these third-way Democrats. Third way just being working your way back to the corporate class. Who makes that case? Who argues that vociferously, full-throatedly, without hedge, vigorously? Who wakes up in the morning and goes to bed at night making that argument? Not captured by corporate cash, not in this squeamish, squishy way where the Democratic Party having this utopian idea that you can represent workers and the top 1%. When really what it boils down to is giving certain platitudes with incrementalism around the edges being the best that they can pull off. Fuck incrementalism. Who makes the argument for the worker? Who makes that full-throated case without any hedge at all? Who makes that case? Yes, there's Sanders. There's Tulsi. Ro Khanna, I've heard him on Twitter making up a fuss. But it's not the established order of things. And fact is, you have two major parties, neither of which fights for the workers or the interests of the 99%. This may change. Bernie Sanders is teaming up with Varoufakis, Yanis Varoufakis, and they are putting this idea of a progressive movement across the world. It's not necessarily isolated by local boundaries. Now, the idea here is to combat right-wing extremism that's taken hold in the various countries, because from their argument, right-wing extremism is not isolated to any particular individual country, and the people who are involved in this, like Steve Bannon, Marie Le Pen, cross boundaries. They bring up the guy from Italy also, I think, Salvini. Look, the main point here is there is nobody fighting for the interests and making that argument. And ultimately, you end up with centrist Democrats who own the party itself and who, under the current model of things, would never make that case for the worker, would never get out there and make this rational, sane argument within the context of our society, where you have the majority of the people can't even pay a $400 bill, that are making $30,000 with bills skyrocketing. Do you realize that if you made $30,000 but at the same time had access to healthcare, had access to education, that the $30,000 wouldn't be as bad as it is now? Your world can be different. And they are making an argument that your world can be different, but not necessarily isolated within the borders itself, but actually crossing boundary lines. This is the story right here. Bernie Sanders is partnering with Greek Progressive to build a new leftist movement. I like this. This is necessary. Not just in the United States, but you can make an argument that the failure of the left is the rise of the right. That if there was a left-wing, credible left-wing option, that the public would choose that credible left-wing option. Fact of the matter is, if Donald Trump was running against Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump would have had his ass handed to him. I think at this point, even Hillary, at 3 a.m, when she's having a conversation with whatever God she believes in a come to Jesus moment, would say Bernie would have won. There was no alternative. You gave them status quo or change. Radical change. Uncertain change. A blue-collar billionaire. And they leapt at the opportunity to get a blue-collar billionaire. Hillary Clinton got the stuffing beat out of her all across this country, with the exception of California. And she clings to this idea that she had 3 million more votes, all of which took place in one state. The public wanted something different. The public was screaming for something different, crying for something different, willing to throw themselves at the feet of a blue-collar billionaire, a reality show host, in order to get something other than status quo. A different world is possible, but a different world is not possible if the people aren't necessarily given options to choose from. Bernie Sanders is partnering with Greek Progressive to build a new leftist movement. They're trying to rebuild the left. They're trying to rebuild the left, not just here in the United States, but also in Europe. And they're even welcoming Obrador from Mexico to join. I don't know if this is going to turn into a party per se. I would hope that it's turned into a party, particularly in the various countries, kind of like Labor, if you had Labor in all of the various countries, or Green Party in all of the various countries. But to build a strong leftist movement that's concise, that understands what it is, that doesn't waffle, that's not squeamish, that represents the interests of workers in a 99% in a full-throated, no-hedge way. We have nothing like that currently. Nothing like that. Yanis Varoufakis, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is teaming up with Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis to formally launch Progressive International in Vermont on November 30th, Varoufakis said in Rome. Varoufakis, who made an announcement during Friday's press conference in Rome, told BuzzFeed News that they are inviting incoming Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador to join the movement. Lopez Obrador spokesperson Jesus, I'm joking, I know his name is Jesus Ramirez, told BuzzFeed that he has no formal invitation to join the movement. Varoufakis described the initiative in part as an attempt to counter the work of Steve Bannon, who also made an appearance in Rome last month, has been doing so to help the nationalists forge a united front in elections for the European Union's parliament next spring. Varoufakis also accused immigration critics like Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini and German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer of being part of the extremist alliance. The financiers are internationalists, the fascists, the nationalists, the racists, like Trump, Bannon, Seehofer, Salvini. They're the internationalists, Varoufakis said. They bind together. The only people who are failing are progressives. Essentially, there's no left to combat this. A spokesperson, well, I don't care about that. The party is setting itself up as a left-wing counter to nationalist forces that want to weaken the EU in the name of restoring national sovereignty. It also wants to position itself as an alternative to politicians like France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Angela Merkel, who want to preserve or strengthen the European Union without giving direct democratic control to the European citizens. Key to the European Spring Platform, which was formally adopted Friday, is replacing the current EU's administration, in which most of the power rests with the unelected leaders, with a constitution that puts the power in the hands of the legislature directly, European voters. European Parliament is a little weird. They don't elect their leaders in the same way we elect our leaders. They elect representatives who in turn elect the leaders. But you can imagine that there's a certain distance from the public itself electing and putting those people in offices. Varoufakis wants to change that. It also wants the European Union to have greater spending power, have more direct leverage and responsibility over the financial system, and take a role in fighting initiatives like fighting poverty and climate change. Yes, I like that. To illustrate the internationalism, and understand, I think Varoufakis would agree with me on this. He looks at the European Union as a system of, there are problems, there are fundamental problems in the way that the euro is constructed, and the way the European Union is constructed, especially from the standpoint of unelected bureaucrats making decisions over millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. His argument is that the nationalists, the people who want to return power to the state, are wrong in their solution. That it's not necessarily the issue of returning power to the state. The fact of the matter is you're going to be in Europe regardless what you do. Whether you return power to the state or not, you're still part of Europe. To combat big issues like climate change and poverty, especially issues like climate change, requires action across a broad front. That's not something one country can do alone, not even the United States for that matter. It requires international cooperation, and an entity like the European Union would be much better suited to do something like that as opposed to an individual nation. That's assuming that the individual nation would even care to do it under a right-wing populace. I hope that makes sense. Let's keep going. Essentially, even if you check out of Europe, you're still in Europe. Ergo, you're much better off in the European Union and making changes to the European Union to make the European Union more democratic, not necessarily break it. I hope that makes sense. There's a difference in those things. The solutions that these guys are coming up with is just to leave. He's saying, don't leave, just fix it. To illustrate the internationalism, European Spring will run citizens from one country as candidates in another. Varoufakis, for example, will be offered as a candidate in Germany. The chair of the European Springs Council, Lorenzo Mercier, told BuzzFeed News. Party spokesman David Adler told BuzzFeed News Varoufakis might also be simultaneously running for prime minister in Greece, which is widely expected to hold a national election at the same time in the European vote. That should be amazing. I am very curious about how that one would turn out. Varoufakis bashed the Italian government for seeking special treatment instead of demanding a new budgetary rules that would benefit all of Europe. But Varoufakis also believes that the financial reforms require a more centralized financial system. National governments currently have to bail out banks when they get into trouble, even though the euro and investment flow across borders. He also said that tax cuts contained in the Italian budget would benefit the rich instead of simultaneously affecting growth. Austerity for the many is socialism for the bankers has given rise to the present fascist movement in Italy, to the collapse of the political center everywhere, and to the reactionary divide in Europe that Mr. Trump dreams of, Varoufakis said. Today, here in Rome, we're saying enough Another Italy, another Europe is not only possible, but it is here in the form of the party's progressive, ecological, feminist, humanist, rational program. I love that. Varoufakis said that the message for Italy's left, which is in disarray following the elections that put Salvini government into power, Italian progressives are no longer alone. I like that, but I don't necessarily know what he can do about it in the meantime. But Varoufakis said that the left is the ones who, by ideology, are international. We have to act like it. I love this. One last point. Varoufakis and Sanders first said that they were working together on a joint initiative in pair for op-eds published in The Guardian last month. Varoufakis was vague about what the group would offer, saying it would help progressives coherence. Sanders' office did not reply. I suspect that they're launching this and they don't necessarily have any initial game plans of action in as much as an announcement. Sanders did, and I think Trudy sent me this, where Sanders did this. It was a very long piece, but the piece boiled down to we need to be internationalists. We can't necessarily be localized in our own little sandbox when these right-wingers are being internationalists. We need to do the same. One last point. It is unclear what they're planning on doing with this right away, outside of the announcement and outside of trying to get a little buzz for it, because ultimately you need some buzz if we make it work, meaning it's the chicken and the egg type thing. In order to get anything done, you have to announce it, but you don't have anything to get done before the announcement, if that makes sense. So this is their way of trying to push this forward and try to get this out there and kind of launch this. I think this is right. The problems that are affecting the United States are not singular to the United States. We've been in multiple countries, and I've had the opportunity to talk to multiple people in those countries, especially people who are driving Uber, whether you're talking about Kenya, whether you're talking about here in Portugal. Portugal is a little different because everybody's so laid back. But the idea of poverty and everything else, even in poor countries like Egypt and Kenya, the same rule applies. The scale may be different from an economic standpoint, but the issues that plague us are similar to the issues that plague them. I have more in common with a worker in Egypt or Kenya than I do with the top 1% in any of these countries. All of us do. All of us are in the same sandbox. The idea that the median is $30,000, where 6 to 8% of the country makes less than $50,000 a year, while bills and everything else is rising, meaning the cost of living in this country and other countries are skyrocketing. Something needs to change. Fact of the matter is, a different world is possible. If you're spending 95% of your worth on the top 1%, the system that allowed something like that to take place needs to change. It needs to fundamentally change. If a system allows that, then the question is not necessarily, a system did it so it's okay. It's the system itself needs to be augmented. It needs to be changed. It needs to be tweaked, moved, whatever you want to call it. But there is no system that should give 95% of the worth to the top 1% when it is us that do the labor, that do the work. We are the workers. We are the 99%. And that wealth should be accrued around us. So I don't think anybody's going to be here, but I'll take a look.